everybody, welcome back to the RBL podcast. And well, we are back today. The first week has literally just been completed in our Sim League, and we've started to see maybe some teams jump out and get some wins, some teams still trying to get a win on the board. But, we need to talk a bit about the off-season. We need to talk about some of the interesting things that are going on. And to help me try and navigate some of this, we have the Pacers GM, Van the Red, back. Van, it's good to have you back on the show.
Good to be on. I enjoyed this pod last year. I'm glad you had me back for it again.
Great, it's great to have you back. And I think you guys had a really interesting end to the season. You were so close in the end.
Yeah, but Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is too good. It was too much for us to overcome.
That Lakers team is phenomenal and will continue to be phenomenal, I think, as we move forward with some of their off-season signings and so on. But you got a nice young Pacers team there. The time is on your side. Kareem will retire at some point, I'm sure. You just need to bide your time.
Hopefully, he had in real life he had one of the longest careers ever. We gotta hope he bows out a little earlier in RBL.
Yeah, who knows? It is the era. It is a fantastic era to kind of play through as we go through these different seasons. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of those interesting players and some of those game changing players that have kind of arrived on the scene this off season. But today we're going to sort of break down a couple of things. I've got a list of 10 players, Van, that I thought would be interesting for us to talk about. I know you've got a list of teams, and we're just going to chat through some of this. I think. What do you think?
Sounds like the way to approach it.
Okay, well, look, we have to start going back to the off season, and we have to talk a little bit about the first two picks in the latest draft. There's no denying it. Both of them are phenomenal players. Mr. Magic Johnson, I think we'll start with the number one pick in this draft. Gone to the Kings, and well, judging by the 4 games he's played, Van, he's on 18 points per game, 6 rebounds, 3 assists. His turnovers are quite high at 3, but that field goal percentage is looking rather nice at 63%. And if we look at some of the efficiency numbers, his numbers are off the chart already. In terms of that, perhaps that defense needs to come up a little bit, but yeah, game-changing player arriving as the number one pick in the Kings, a team that completely rolled all the lottery dice, I guess, to acquire him. And yeah, your thoughts on Magic so far and the Kings and where they are heading?
What leapt out to me looking at his numbers was the 760 true shooting percentage, which is absurd and leads the league 4 games into his rookie year.
Yeah, I think that's the incredible thing, and I've got him up on the screen for anyone watching the video, and the potential for this guy is off the charts. He could pretty much do absolutely anything he ever would want to do in a game of basketball, which is not unlike the real life Magic Johnson. Let's be perfectly honest with ourselves.
Not at all.
But yeah, I'm really interested about this. And the reason I've picked him as the first player, I think, to talk about, along with Mr. Bird, who we'll kind of get to, is just, I think the question I wanted to ask you really is, Kansas City obviously acquired him. They've tried to build a bit of a roster around him. I guess, how much does this change the landscape of the league, do you think, moving forward?
Well, I think the advantage that Magic gives you is he truly can play anywhere, so you are not restricted in any way in building a team around him, based on his positional needs. You need him to play point. He's a Hall of Fame point guard. You need him to play center. He won an NBA championship playing center. And he can play anything in between. It is an interesting crew, and I think that we are probably far from a done build on this. But I'm intrigued to see what they can do this year. It seems a lot to ask of 35-year-old Rick Barry to be what's needed around him, and they're a little short in the front court. But this is the team to watch, I think, looking forward.
Yeah, I think it is. It is definitely one of the teams to watch, and I agree. This isn't going to be the final championship build for the Kings. I think the interesting thing that came across was, obviously, anyone who's in the Discord server will know we've got a series of AI pundits that I've put together, and I was very interested when I normally, as I do, I throw different bits of data at them and just basically say discuss this. And I was very interested that they put Kansas City as one of the teams that could contend this year, which I thought was a little bit preemptive. But maybe they are seeing something with the build around this, and there's no denying Magic Johnson is going to, even at the moment, is going to be one of the best players in the league from day one. So, yeah, I'm really excited about the Kings. I'm really looking forward to see how they build around him going forward. But we can't,
Indeed.
yeah,
Yeah. I thought one of my arguments for picking him was I don't think Magic makes you enough of a winner this year to mess up your pick for next year, which you should be able to add Kansas City another pick that way. Whereas the next guy we're going to discuss might totally change your build timeline.
yeah, I think so. And we have to obviously talk about Larry Bird going to the Celtics. I mean, it's almost like it's just destiny that this man always has to play for the Celtics. I mean, I can't. There's no denying that that was like just a bit of lottery luck by the Boston Celtics to land that number 2 pick and walk away with Larry Bird. But yeah, as you exactly alluded to, I think similar in the sense that he can do pretty much everything. He's a little bit more developed, I'd say, than Magic Johnson, so a little bit less potential to kind of come out of him. I mean, Magic's potential is potentially shows that could go past in terms of the overall sort of ratings beyond Larry Bird. But yeah, I mean, just to throw his numbers out there at the moment, I guess again interesting. It's a little bit more rocky, I guess, on that sense. The numbers are similar: 17 points per game, 9 rebounds, 5 assists, 6 turnovers. But the shooting percentage is looking rather low at 34%. And then when we look at his true shooting, it's back at 44%. So he's probably not quite demonstrating that really efficient skills scoring set that we probably would expect him to develop as he moves forward. But yeah, I mean, I think the Celtics are an interesting one because whilst they were in an interesting position, they weren't necessarily at the bottom of the RBL. I would say they were a bit closer to that mid pack, and they obviously picked up the likes of Michael Ray Richardson last year. So maybe they've got a couple of additional pieces, and Cedric Maxwell, I should also point out, alongside Larry Bird already, that maybe could help this team move forward a bit quicker than the Kings. But yeah, what's your reflections on Bird and how he looks so far? I know we're only 3 games in, but how he looks so far and the Celtics.
Yeah, it's an awkward team, to be honest, at this point in time. You have Bird and Cornbread Maxwell and Michael Ray Richardson as the young core that I think will build out. Michael Ray Richardson was my favorite player in last year's draft, and I think he's going to be a good complement. But everyone else on this team is old, especially the point guards are ancient. Uh, Dave Bing is still hanging around on this team. Um, Charlie Scott. So I think they have a bit of build left in them to put the pieces around Bird. Too much is being asked. 6 turnovers as a rookie just means he's got the ball more than he should, in my opinion. So I think it'll be interesting to see if he can start moving, say, a Sidney Wicks or a Dave Cowens. I don't know that anyone's going to give you a lot for Charlie Scott to try and get younger in the backcourt and better at the point.
Yeah, I agree with you, and yeah, I kind of like the trio that they've got to build around though. I do like Maxwell, I do like Bird, and I do like Richardson. So I think they've got a really good trio of good young players. It's just redefining everything that sits around them at the moment. As you kind of said, this Celtics team is kind of as it did in this period in real life is moving away from this old guard into this new guard, and maybe that new generation of rosters gonna come through in a couple of years time. I'd be interested to see just on the Celtics whether they get closer to the playoff hunt this year, just with adding Larry Bird, because they looked really good at the beginning of last season from memory, and then they kind of faded away. So we'll see. But should we talk about another interesting player that I've picked up from the draft as well? And we have to.
Yes.
I mean, we have to go and talk Van about Sidney Moncrief because he was projected to go third. He obviously dropped down the pecking order in terms of selection, and he is an interesting prospect. I guess the Clippers are in a difficult phase. They've got a new owner, general manager coming in, rejig the roster a little bit this off season. But yeah, Sidney Moncrief, what's your thoughts on him so far? And do you think he was maybe underdrafted at this early stage?
I think the question every GM had to say was he has the potential to be one of the three best players in this draft, and he has the potential to not play many games with that shaky injury rating. So I think each general manager had to say, is it going to look worse if I draft a player who plays 240 games for me, or if I pass on a guy who ends up in the Hall of Fame? And that was the reason he dropped. I'm excited by him. I hope things go well health wise for him. And I think they're starting to build an infrastructure there where they won't have to ask too much of him while their training staff gets into him and tries to get him a little healthier.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that was the balancing act that I think those teams at the top needed to take. And I always think you take the dice roll. You always take the best player. Injuries, you can be unlucky with that, and then you have to go back to the drawing board a little bit. But yeah, I'm excited to see how he does with the Clippers. The team around him is not overly terrible. I like the Calvin Nate pickup as well. And they've moved some of the log around, so they're basically going to give a bit more playing time to Wayne Cooper, who I thought was massively underutilized last year, who could develop into a really good front court prospect. So yeah, Clippers I think are still in a rebuilding phase. They've still got to get a bunch of pieces around him. But yeah, Sidney Moncrief, I'm going to be very much looking week to week to see if he gets injured or not. Because if he doesn't get injured and he continues to develop, we could have a really, really interesting player come out of the Clippers, really.
Yeah, Wayne Cooper was actually my most interesting player on the Clippers. Like you said, he was blocked mostly by Swin Nader last year, who's moved on. And I think Cooper's success, Nat and Moncrief for the future of the team. With Elmore Smith, you're always going to have a good defense. But for this year, for me, the question was, is Wayne Cooper the player we thought he was in last year's draft?
Yeah, I agree. We kind of didn't see that, and so early signs are looking good, right? He's playing heavy minutes, 13 and 6 in terms of points and rebounds. His 3 blocks a game at the minute, which is incredible if he can keep that up. And his true shooting percentage is 55%. So that's looking really promising to me.
Indeed, Cooper was who I was going to draft last year if Michael Thompson didn't fall to me, largely on the strength of that block potential.
Yeah. So let's move away a little bit from the draft prospects, and I mean, I'm sorry guys, there's probably a bunch of other draft prospects that I could talk all day about because it was a really really good draft in that sort of top 10 pack. But we have to move away and talk about some of the free agency moves that happened because if you think the draft was transitional in terms of players arriving, the free agency did also throw some really interesting moves around the league, and I've got to talk a little bit about the New Jersey Nets because and in particular about one player. But obviously, before we go in and talk about that, I've got to mention that the Nets managed to acquire ML Carr, Brian Taylor as well in part of some moves, and plus some other pieces. But there's one player in particular I am very interested to see how he does in the Nets jersey, which is Ricky Sobers. And the reason I say this is because he obviously arrived in the league in terms of Phoenix, was then moved away to Philly quite soon in the first season, played some heavy minutes to begin with in the first season. Then he kind of took a bit of a back seat to become more of a six-man type role for the 76ers, who came so close to winning it all last year. He's then gone on to the Nets. He's now starting as their starting point guard, and his numbers are looking pretty good so far, I have to say. He's never going to score a huge amount of points. He's on 12 points per game. They've got Bernard King who can basically do that for them. But his assist to turnover ratio is looking pretty good at 1.7. And yeah, so I'm really interested because he's on a heavy contract now. He's now paid like to be one of the stars of the team, and whether he can step up and be that elusive, dominating point guard that can kind of give King the ball and take this team back into playoff contention this year is something I'm going to be looking out for.
I'm excited to see that too. Sobers to me does not look like your classic point guard. I always saw him more as of a third guard, but he's got the potential to grow into this. He's a good young player, and they don't really need him to be their main creator, as you said, with Bernard King being the son this team revolves around. I'm eager to see the assist to turnover ratio is not what I would want from it, but the raw assist numbers are better than I would have expected. I actually had Brian Taylor as my most interesting player on the Nets for the reason that thinking he would probably be more of an organizing factor. His assist to turnover ratio is a little better, but not as great as I would want either, though.
Yeah, I agree with you. When I looked at this, I thought Brian Taylor would be the starting point guard for the Nets, but it's very clear that the CPU who is currently running the Nets, for some reason, thinks Sobers is the better point guard. And this is why I think it's a fascinating thing to watch. Is whether the CPU switches that round or switches it up over the season, I don't know. But interesting to see that they've basically given Sobers the keys with the ball and said to Taylor, you can just be the second option essentially around King. So yeah, I mean, it's looking good so far. They're 3-1 after the first week, so something's working well there.
The CPU did a better job than I expected building this team this offseason.
Yeah, I think they did. I'm still very, very annoyed that they managed to steal ML Carr from me because I was hoping I'd get him back on a dime, and that was obviously not going to be the case as soon as they threw him a big deal. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about the 76ers though, because if there was one team that had a very dramatic off season, we have to talk about the 76ers, who have gone from I'm sure Rass won't mind this. It's gone from being a contender to being a complete rebuild, and that was a conscious decision. It wasn't on the basis of poor management. It was a conscious decision that this team he wanted to try and rebuild and have a go at doing something from scratch. And I really do respect him for doing that, given how good the 76ers were before we got to the off season. But there is one player on this 76ers roster that I would say is it remains of the old guard, and that is Darryl Dawkins, who at the age of 22, you think I'm talking to him as if he's like a prime 29, 30-year old player who's done everything. He's still got so much time left in this league. He just signed a huge deal in the offseason for 6 years. And I think it's fair to say that this 76ers team is Darryl Dawkins' team now. So for me, the question I'm asking is Darryl Dawkins going to step up and be that Moses Malone type player to really be the dominating franchise guy for this 76ers team going forward? I don't know at this moment in time. I'm still waiting to see what that looks like. But the early indications look great. 37 minutes, 33 points, 11 rebounds, 67% field goal percentage, and in terms of true shooting, that's 69%. And so, on the basis of it, he looks like he could be a Moses Malone point two at the moment.
That is exactly the question and exactly the comparison. He also was my most important player for the 76ers. I love the potential of Billy McKinney and TR Dunn at point guard. I think Rasp did a great job to put them together. But this team goes as far as Daryl Dawkins takes them. The only quibble I would have from the early returns is only a point 0.4 on off differential. They need to own his minutes and really shine in those. But maybe that's just too much to ask for this supporting cast at this point in time. But you could not ask for much more from him.
Yeah, I agree. And so yeah, that's one thing I'm going to be keeping a lookout for 76ers. Not only just because it's interesting, but also because it impacts my division. And I really would like the 76ers not to be a good team this year because, my God, they were hard to get through last year. And you know, if they find a magical way to turn this team into a contender with Darryl Dawkins, I think we're all we're all struggling in our division at that point. But yeah, another front court player that I've got listed here, Van, is in the Chicago Bulls, and it is Artis Gilmore. So the backstory for this one, and the reason why I'm interested is, I mean, it's no denying Artis Gilmore is one of the best centers in the league. He's one of the best offensive centers, best defensive centers. Incredible player. MVP discussions for every year. I think we've been running the RBL so far, but he was heavily touted around, tried to get trades going with the Bulls. Um, so the question I have really is, is he going to remain on the Bulls roster throughout the season, or is someone going to try and nab him? And will that impact his MVP level discussion that has been there for the past couple of years or not?
That is the question. I don't think that there is any player in the RBL more available than Artis Gilmore right now, given their seeming rebuild direction. I don't know what year they're targeting to be competitive, but it's not this year, and it's almost impossible to not be competitive with a player of Artis Gilmore's talent on the roster. He's still 30. He probably hasn't really started his decline yet. He's only signed for 2 more years, so you're not locked into a long-term deal. I don't know why he's still here, and I can't imagine he's still here at the end of the season.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll come back near sort of trade deadline, and either he'll be traded from the Bulls, and the Bulls will have got that rebuilding package that they really want, or he'll be one that will heavily be discussed in terms of options of where he could go, because there are plenty of teams that are in that playoff hunt that would be looking for someone like him to take them from, you know, a playoff team to a contending team. It's just a case of who's got the right package for the Bulls to kind of help them move on in the direction they want to go to. But yeah, so Artis Gilmore is definitely one that I have on my list in terms of keeping an eye on. But we need to move back over now to the Cavaliers and back over to talking a little bit about free agency, because we talked about one CPU rebuild with the Nets. The other CPU rebuild with the Cavs was not too terrible either in the sense of things. This is a team that was definitely at the bottom of the RBL. Complete rebuild. They had Reggie Theus, the shining light from previous last season's draft, but they managed to add two very interesting front court players. And I'm going to cheat a little bit here and say that I'm picking two players, not just one here, and that is Caldwell Jones, who obviously come over from the 76ers, and then we've got George McInnes, who also has come over from the 76ers. So in the grand scheme of things, right, rather than talk about two players or one of those, we need to talk about the fact that the Cleveland Cavaliers have managed to get two of the front court players from the team that was one game away from winning the finals last year. What's your thoughts and reflections on that for the Cavs?
Well, I have to start by eating a little crow on this one because I talked so much crap about the awful offseason I thought they had, and this team's really good, and they absolutely crushed me in the third game of the season. I think was up on their bulletin board. The decision to go for Jones and McInnes when you've just started a rebuild and your best player is 22 stunned me. But I can't argue with the success of it thus far. I actually had Jim Paxson as my most important player on this team, just adding more young talent to the team, but Paxson and Theus together are going to give space to Caldwell Jones and George McInnes that they probably didn't see. The only failing you could have put at the feet of the 76ers last year was they were almost entirely inside oriented. And the space those gentlemen should have to operate should be a big difference this year.
Yeah, I agree. I think I've been very impressed by how some of the CPU builds have actually happened this offseason. Obviously, we've underestimated the ability of this over a decade old program now, but yeah, it's looking good so far. They're 3-1. The balance is looking good. They've moved Reggie Theus to the sort of the premier sort of point guard now. They've moved Jim Paxson, as you mentioned, over to sort of small forward at the minute. It looks like, and yeah, that front court's looking really solid. Caldwell Jones is playing centre obviously for them, putting up some solid numbers, 10 and 10. Double out of him. The likes of George McInnes is putting up 22 and 7. So he's had a leap in terms of his performances with the 76ers, which is again not surprising given how stacked the 76ers were. So yeah, I mean, I'm just going to be interested to see whether they can keep it up and whether this team can turn into a really good playoff team. And if these two continue to kind of stay at this level, for 2-3 years, and the likes of Theus develops for 2-3 years, and Paxson develops another 2-3 years, we could be talking about a situation here where the Cavs quickly turn around and be one of those contending teams, really.
Yeah, if Theus and Paxson can get to their potential before Jones and McGinnis age out, I think is the key question there.
Yeah, absolutely. Given that both of them signed fairly long deals, I think they're both 6 years from. Yeah, they were 6 years from memory. So yeah, they're going
Yeah,
to
there's
be.
definitely some downside risk on those deals.
Yeah, absolutely. But let's talk about. I mean, free agency was interesting, and there was another front court player, another big front court player that moved on, and that was Marvin Webster, and has moved on from the Seattle SuperSonics over to the Denver Nuggets. The Nuggets team, I think I've talked about before, in my opinion, which is I think they are on the cusp of being a good playoff team, and maybe the fact that the CPU has handled them for a couple of seasons now hasn't helped them in that position. But this front court, I'm just going to read out the other names that are around the likes of Webster. We've got Kevin Kennert, we've got the likes of Dan Izzle, Spencer Hayward, Lonnie Shelton, and then we're not even mentioning the fact that they've had Michael Cooper, the number one pick from last season's draft, and then they managed to pick up Alan Lavelle, an really interesting young rookie this year at point guard. So on the face of it, this team looks really solid. But from my perspective, in Marvin Webster, I'm wondering if he's the missing piece for this Nuggets team, because I've talked about Dan Izzle plenty of times before and how he is a phenomenal offensive front court player, and maybe he needed that stopper next to him. I think Marvin Webster is probably the biggest definition of a stopper in this league that we're ever going to get. But yeah, what do you think? Do you think he's the missing piece for this Nuggets team to kind of move into that playoff and sort of maybe contender status?
I completely agree. Webster is the complement that Issel needed. Now Issel can concentrate on what he does best, which is play offense. Cooper is, I think, the ultimate role player. I don't know that he ever makes an All-Star team, but he'll make every team he's on better. And I love the acquisition of Allen Level. I think he probably should have gone earlier, and he is the complement all of these guys need because there wasn't anyone on the roster that could really organize an offense the way it needed to be done. And having him fall to 8 was quite a boon for this roster.
Yeah, I'm going to be really interested. They're 2-1 so far. The numbers are looking really good in their favour, and they're looking like a really good offensive team. Defense is looking pretty solid, so we'll see if they can keep it up. But yeah, Marvin Webster, I think that was interesting. But we have to probably go and talk a little bit about the other side of it. So the Supersonics moved away from Webster, and they kind of, I'd say, like took a bit of an emergency punt. They didn't pay the full money that they'd have paid a Webster or someone of that nature, but they brought in John Shoemate to basically cover him at centre. So not obviously not a premier stopper like Webster, but looks like a pretty solid player. And for me, the thing that's interesting, given that we've also seen the first week of the season start now, I can say this is when I saw that signing, I was like, oh, I'm not sure whether that it's worth throwing that amount of money at him. I'd say he's probably a good rotation piece or a starter in a non-contending team, and I'd consider the Seattle to be a contending team. But there's no denying the GM obviously at Seattle has got it bang on so far. I mean, they're 4-0. Their defense is looking phenomenal. Six has stepped up to the role and is still continuing to look pretty solid. But yeah, Shumate, I did not expect that start from them. And for me, I'm looking at it going, can he keep up some of these numbers that we're seeing? Some of these efficiencies. He looks like a really good defensive player so far. But what's your thoughts on this, Van?
Well, first off, the Shoemake contract I thought was superb. I mean, to there was a lot of money thrown around in free agency this year, and to get a solid starting player at the price you should pay for a solid starting player and without an overpay, I thought was great. Leaves them the flexibility to re-sign some of their other players as that becomes necessary. And he does look like the complement again, like you said, not the guy I would have chosen, I don't think, but he looks like a very good complement to the roster they have around. And I love the pick of Cliff Robinson in the draft for them as well.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's interesting because it's completely a different type of player who I would probably pick up. So it's great to see that people have got different ways of trying to build their team and stuff. And this Supersonics team is stacked with talent, right? I mean, we could talk about they picked up Fred Brown last off season, phenomenal pickup for them, I think. You talked about they've obviously got Doug Collins they brought in as well. Dennis Johnson's still there, so Cliff Robinson I really like as a pickup. It's a shame he's injured at the moment, but looks like he could turn into be a really really good sort of front court, maybe sort of front court tweener type player that could really complement this team. So yeah, it's looking really good for Seattle so far. And yeah, Shoemate I did not have down on my list as being a player that I would be talking about in week one. But let's talk about my final selection that I've got, and then I think we'll turn it over after this to some teams that I think you've got, Van, that you're interested in. But my final one I've got to finish in is a player that I would absolutely have loved to have signed this off season. If there was any player that wanted to sign in free agency, it would have been this player. And I am absolutely gutted that I had no opportunity, I had no money available to even compete with this in the end. But Alvin Adams is probably one of my favourite players in the RBL. I just on perspective, he's absolutely everything you would ever want. And we're talking about like the likes of Larry Bird and Magic Johnson earlier, and I would say Alvin Adams, on the face of it at the moment, potential aside, those two, is probably just as good a player as some of these. And I think the really interesting thing about this is he's playing shooting guard at the moment. This is a front court player who's 6'9", is playing shooting guard for the Warriors at the minute and putting up 19 points per game, 48% shooting, eight rebounds, 6 assists. And his efficiency to shooting is 56%. So if you want a guy to match up against Larry Bird, he's kind of your perfect opposite. And so, the Warriors moved away from Rick Barry and the aging sort of side of it, but they've thrown him in, and I'm just fascinated by the fact, one, I think he's a great player, but I'm fascinated by the fact that he's playing shooting guard at the minute. That just boggles my mind at the moment.
I agree. I that blew me away when I saw it. I had him down as my most interesting player on the Warriors as well. I think with a foundation of Parrish and Sonny Parker, you're gonna be good. But he really diversifies. But I thought he'd be their power forward. He's the greatest center in Phoenix Suns history in real life. So to see him playing shooting guard and not doing a bad job of it, 3.3 turnovers is a bit high, but that's almost a 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio. It boggles my mind. He's a great player, and I'm glad to see him succeeding there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'm also wondering, similar to how we talked about Webster with the Nuggets, whether he is the missing piece for this Warriors team to be a contending team. Um, Signs are a bit shaky at the minute. They started 2-2. Maybe there's a bit of gelling and cohesion that still needs to happen there at this moment in time. But yeah, I guess I'm really interested to see how that kind of moves forward. Um, yeah, and so that kind of brings it to a close in terms of players that I was interested in talking about. But I know you had a couple of teams, Van, that you were also interested in discussing today.
Yeah, I had four more that leapt out at me. The first of those was the Pistons, and they have a continuing mission to find some outside balance to their incredible bruising front court. Last year, I hoped that Kevin Porter might step up for them, but I think he probably is what he is, and that's a very solid player. The question now is, can Otis Birdsong provide the outside balance to that inside front court they have?
Yeah, I think the Pistons are interesting. I agree, and in the sense of this team is now at the point where is it now Bob Lanier's team still, or is it now Otis Birdsong's team? And we had that sort of amazing first season from the Pistons where they went on that Cinderella run through the playoffs and were very, very close to really getting into the finals and kind of taking it all the way. Had a bit of a difficult season last year. Um, Made some acquisitions, I think, in the off season prior to that, picking up Mickey Johnson and that. And yeah, I'm not sure where this Pistons team is now. I would say they're in that middle to playoff pack now. And as you said, there's a lot of factors I think they need to consider to take forward.
Yeah, with the acquisition of Bill Cartwright in the draft, you do have to wonder if they might pivot as well and look to move Lanier for some balance for maybe a top-notch wing.
Yeah, I agree. That was definitely a fantastic steal in the draft, Bob Bill Cartwright, wasn't it?
It was that was I thought the Cavaliers had completely blown it by not taking him, but then they got the two 76ers on the inside, and turns out they will not, at least short term, need Bill Cartwright at all.
Yeah. So
The
yeah,
next team on my list was the Hawks, and it's a really good team and it's a really young team, which makes you worry about defense. But they have Tree Rollins, who's my most interesting players on the team. If anybody can make you a top quartile defense by just being on the roster, it's Tree. And I'm interested to see how far he can carry that defense this year.
yeah. I mean, I think the Hawks are always in that contending sort of perennial playoff contending team. They've got likes of John Drew, who provides that offensive might. Eddie Johnson looks like he's turned into probably one of the best point guards in the league now at this point. And yes, Tree Runners holding it down. I think the interesting thing that I would take away from the Hawks this year is Junior Bridgman. I'm interested to see how he fits with this roster. And again, we're only a week in, but the early signs look great because he's completely lit the floor up in terms of his offensive output. He's jumped in terms of his points per game. His general efficiency is looking good still. His offensive efficiency is looking great, and maybe he was that second punch that they need alongside John Drew to take them into that sort of contending, beating some of these top tier teams.
Absolutely. His true shooting's a little lower than I'd like, but all of the numbers look really good, and he might give them some of the balance. Again, this is a terrific young team, um, but I think defense is the question, and I think Tree is probably the answer. Uh, the Only two more teams I wanted to talk about. One is the Bucks. Last year, I thought Phil Ford was their most important player, and he did everything you could ask of a rookie. But I think the real delimiter for the future of the Bucks franchise is whether the Greyhound can turn into the player that he might be. The NBA is a league that's built on its first team All NBA players. Walter Davis could be a first team All NBA player. I'm just eager to see if he can get there.
Yeah, I mean he's had a awful start to the season given the fact that he's injured before the season started for 29 days. So, and the Bucks are really going to be tested in terms of this early start to the season as to who can step up to the mark. Yeah, I think for me, I had the Bucks down as a sort of sneaky contender last year. I thought that they would really step it up. I thought they made some really good acquisitions. I really like Phil Ford. They've got Phil Ford, Davis, Johnson. I think the thing that's holding them back, if we're talking about reflections from some of the lists I had on my players and some of the front court players that might be available, it would be the front court of the Bucks. I think that's the thing they're missing in terms of taking them to a contender. So maybe we're already alluding to possible trade activity happening here because I'm not convinced the likes of Harvey Catchings is going to really be the right player to hold down that front court. And you look at the fact that having to play Marquise Johnson, I think out of position at the front court at the moment. If they put him back into small forward position, play Purvis short out as a sort of 6-man type role, Davis obviously and Phil Ford back in their natural roles as you would expect. That's a contending team. So maybe this isn't the final version of the Bucks that we see by the end of the regular season.
You make a good point. They are very deep in wings, way deeper than most teams are in wings. So maybe this is a trade partner for a team looking to shed a center in exchange for some wings.
Yeah, we haven't even talked about Mike Mitchell, who's just sitting there from the draft last year. Again, he's currently playing front court positions, but he's really a wing, and he looks like a pretty solid scoring wing. So plenty of options there for the Bucks, and yeah, interesting team for you to call out there.
And then the final team I had to look at was your New York Knicks, who are off to a spectacular start, one of the three undefeated teams. And as I look at your team, it is deep and rich and strong. And then you have five point guards, none of whom have seemed to have seized the reins. I singled out Ray Williams last year, and he's good, but I feel like that is the difference between you being Eastern Conference finalist, as you were, and being an NBA champion, is whether you can bolster that point guard position just a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. I'm really hoping Ray Williams steps up. He has continued to develop a little bit. His ratings are looking solid, I think now. I guess the interesting thing I found last season was when we brought in Tom Henderson, which was a pure move just to rent him essentially for the second half of the season at the trade towards the trade deadline. He actually he outshone Ray Williams, to be perfectly honest with you. And
Yeah,
I was gutted. I just obviously I couldn't bring him back. I couldn't afford to bring him back basically. So I'm even more gutted the fact that the Spurs got him for like minimum salary. If the Spurs GM is watching this, I'm absolutely gutted by that because I tried to get back for minimum salary and he preferred you. So if there's an insult to injury, he played half a season with me and decided that the Spurs were a better prospect at winning a championship ring. Um, but yeah, no. So I mean, I think yeah, I agree. I think that's why I put in a bunch of point guards because I wanted to throw some things at the wall in the preseason and just see what happened. And that for now we're going with pretty much with the likes of Lloyd Walton covering the main point guard position and backing up Ray Williams. And then we're throwing Norm Van Leer in at shooting guard, which has been okay so far. He's not really been awful. He's not really taking shots. He's not really taking many minutes. Whether that stays the same, I don't know. I quite like Lou Dampier and Wilbur Holland. I think they both bring different things. Wilbur Holland is not really a true point guard. He's more of a sort of shooting guard backup, and I think Lou Dampier is maybe a bit underrated, given he's an experienced vet. So we will see how that goes. I'm really hoping Ray Williams kind of steps up to the mark though this season, and is how I
yeah.
see it.
I hope Ray Williams does, and I love Wilbur Holland off the bench to put on somebody who gets hot. That's a good defensive player right there.
Yeah, he he looked fairly solid in the preseason, but I haven't given him many minutes yet. I want to see what Norm van Leer can kind of do to begin with. Whether that just basically another distributor who can play shoot in the shooting guard slot and just provide to the other scorers, because I don't really need any other scoring. I just need someone to play a bit of defense, pass the ball properly. It's kind of in my head what I'm looking for. So yeah, absolutely. But I think we can't leave it on talking about the Knicks without talking about your team, because I think that's we have to. You also mentioned you were so close to kind of getting to that finals last year. Um, if you compare the Hawks to a young team, I'd say the Pacers are a really good young team as well. Dantley looked like a phenomenal player. He looked like he could really develop into that type of first team player. Michael Thompson is, I think, the question mark for you guys. Whether he can step up and be that type of Dawkins type level of player is the thing that's probably going to be interesting to see whether that holds you back or not.
I could not agree more. Based on early returns, I was actually fairly confident in letting Sam Lacey go and turning his minutes over to Michael Thompson. But the rebounding has been very shaky in the early going this season. Got to see if that comes around, if that's just an aberration, or if we have to make some moves to bolster the rebounding because we're getting killed.
Yeah, and I really like your off-season pickups. I should say I like Billy Knight. I tried to get him in the first season, I believe, and Mike Dunleavy has really shored up your point guard position alongside the likes of Eddie Jordan. So yeah, it's looking really good for you guys. I know you're 1-3 at the moment, but you've had a really tough start. So yeah, interesting to see how you guys do. Whether you can make that additional step this season, really.
Yeah, thank you. It was a great surprise to me last year, and I fear there might be some regression this year, but I like the team, and hopefully they perform.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, we're on week one. We are talking about reflections on the fact that there's been about 4 games played by each team. So I'm sure this will all change as we move through the regular season. Van, I wish you the best of luck with the Pacers this season, and hopefully you can get yourself into that championship hunt this year. And if anyone has any questions or anything they would like us to go through throughout the season, we'll obviously be back with future podcasts and episodes. But yeah, best of luck to everyone for this season. And Van, any final words before we sign off?
No, thanks for having me on. I enjoy coming on and talking about the league with you.
Absolutely, and I'm sure we'll be back for many more episodes, and there'll be a whole host of other players that we need to talk about. And I'm sure there'll be some trades and all kinds of fun activity. But yeah, let's see what this season brings.
Thank you.